We are live. We are live. This is Senate Finance. We have 4 sessions. Ran a little long, so we are behind. So we're going to move. We're continuing. This is Senate Finance. We are continuing our discussion at this point of H 885 and Courtney Harness and Beth Robinson here.
585.
580.
Yeah, okay.
Are here from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And come on up. I think you want to come too. Okay.
Thank you.
So we don't have to move chairs. And I apologize for the lunch.
Oh, please,
But
by all means,
I had meetings all through
please, feel free.
noon.
So I will start if that's acceptable to you all. My name is Beth Roberts and I'm the president and CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield Vermont. Thank you for having me at your committee today. Really appreciate it. Wanted to spend a few minutes explaining who I am a little bit, but importantly, share some comments about our film. So first, it's been wonderful to come into the state of Vermont, buy a house in the state of Vermont and become a member of the state community. I will start just by saying that I have a very long career in health insurance, and it has been really fun to come here and see how health insurance works here in the state of Vermont. So in the way of a bio, I've been in health insurance, it's embarrassing to say the number of years, but for 37 years, literally out of high school. I went into insurance, then decided to go to college after taking a gap year and working in an insurance company and stayed in insurance that entire time. So 37 years in insurance, 23 years with private healthcare. Some of the things that I would like to distinguish is one is all of my work has been in New England states. So I've had the great pleasure of working through that insurance lens in every other state in New England, except for Vermont. So this is my cornerstone and capstone, if you will, of coming to a New England state and working in the insurance arena. I cut my teeth at Harvard Pilgrim by opening up the New Hampshire office and growing New Hampshire to be the second largest Harvard Pilgrim. Harvard Pilgrim became the second largest carrier. My work also extends to, for 30 of those 37 years, has been based in some regard of either doing it directly or oversight of provider negotiations, so negotiating hospital and provider agreements. So deep experience in provider contracting, really understand different markets, big and small in New England, how they work. See similarities with Vermont to those other states, but Vermont is a very different market and fully acknowledge and embrace that at the same time. So that's a little snapshot of me. I will say the last 3.5 years of my career prior to coming to this role is something that I reflect on very positively. Lucky enough to work at Beth Israel Lahey Health, which is a very large system in Boston. 14 hospitals, 7,000 doctors, and my job was very, very easy. It was trying to make that system behave like a single system. So I was the president of the accountable care organization associated with that system. And what that essentially meant is we were working every single day to improve quality of care for the patients that system serves through the physicians and the hospital environment. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot being an insurance executive, then going into the hospital space and what it means to really form partnerships to drive for change. And that's a cornerstone of what we're doing at Blue Cross Vermont. I think you all know Blue Cross Vermont serves a third of Vermonters with a local nonprofit insurance carrier. Very proud of the work this great organization has done. We believe in community and strengthening the healthcare ecosystem and strengthening the community. And that's a pillar of what we do each and every day. We want to make healthcare better for all Vermonters. That is what our mission is to make healthcare better for all Vermonters. Some of the things we've done just in the very short tenure I've been here, I started in November, but became CEO. I had an overlap with the former CEO. And so I started on my own as CEO in January. In that short time, I was lucky enough to join the organization when we were in the middle of a negotiation with UVM Health. And in that negotiation, we were able to pivot quite quickly and get 2 things done. One of the things that we got done is the Green Mountain Care Board gave us a very good goal of trying to reduce rates by approximately 8% for the system. Proud to say that with the partnership of Steve Leffler and myself, we were able to get to agreement on a reduction at UVM of 12.3%. Not only did we reduce unit cost by 12.3% starting in January, so throughout this year, that is the contract that we negotiated. We also built a construct for a value-based contract, which is new and different for the work that Blue Cross and UVM has done together historically. Furthermore, as of last Friday, we agreed to a full value-based contract with UVM Health that will take effect January 27th. So we're already seeing early progress in this partnership mindset to make sure we're accountable. We need to do the work that we need to do to drive to affordability in the state of Vermont. That includes Blue Cross doing things a little differently and leaning on a bit more than perhaps we have historically. And I think I share that spirit with Steve Leffler, and that's how we got there. Also formed a partnership with the BOPS, so the Hospital Association, because I do think that there's a way to negotiate very, very good contracts through a partnership model. It doesn't have to be hitting each other over the head and pointing fingers in various directions. So that's one of the things we're very proud of. Another, we heard, and we all know that people lost their subsidies in January. We have a few new products coming to market January 127. So listening to that and understanding that we need to get more affordable products in the market. We have since created those products. We're filing those products for review and approval by DFR and hope to have them in market for January 1st, 27. So that's another way we're listening to the market, trying to do the best work that we can do. I want to pivot, if you'll allow me, to talk about board, because I think our board, and in relationship to section 1 of the bill that you're discussing, there's a notion that 2 board members should be put on the Blue Cross of Vermont board. What I didn't say about my history is that I've had the pleasure of serving on nonprofit boards, leading nonprofit boards, and managing a nonprofit board. So at BILH, I reported directly into the board, an ACO board that was primary care doctors, specialists, hospital executives, and system executives. So I have a flavor of what a good board looks like. And what I would suggest to you, and feel very confident in saying this, is the Blue Cross board is excellent. It is comprised of 7 Vermonters and 5 Michigan folks. And I'll explain a bit more about Michigan. The 7 Vermonters are people you likely know. There's people who are finance background, education background, sustainability background, excellent Vermonters who have lived in the state of Vermont largely their entire life. They run businesses or senior executives at businesses. Our board chair worked at AHS for a period of time. So we have a very well-rounded set of Vermonters that represent all of us, the constituents here in Vermont, every single time they come to that board table. There is no lack of clarity. They are very, very clear on the fiduciary responsibility that they have, and importantly, the mission responsibility they have to serve Vermonters. And so that I have never seen them fluctuate from that perspective. The beauty of having Michigan, so we have 5 Michigan members, and the reason for Michigan is Blue Cross Vermont is affiliated with the Michigan organization, Blue Cross of Michigan. I think it's important for me to first say why Michigan even affiliated with us. They came in because they believe, true to the Blue Cross name, reputation, and what Blue Cross stands for in every community they serve, they felt it was very, very important to keep smaller Blues independent, local, and dedicated to the stake they serve. And honestly, there was very little in the deal for Michigan. So they came forward because they wanted to see a local Blue Cross organization thrive. And what they have brought to the table in this affiliation is simply remarkable. What they have brought, just in summary, I think you all know we had some financial hardship. They brought forward a $30 million surplus note in order to help us get on good financial footing. We have since paid that surplus note back. So they gave us $30 million. After that happened and we paid it fully back, they kept that as an ongoing opportunity because they know, even though we have 1 year of good financial performance, we need more years than 1 to show that we are a financially sustainable organization. So they backstopped us with that same type of commitment. The other thing they did, I think everybody knows, we had to remove ourselves from the Medicare Advantage market, much like many other health plans throughout the country. That was very sad for us. We still serve Medicare folks through our Medicare supplemental products and our pharmacy product. However, Medicare Advantage was a very good mechanism for Medicare recipients to be insured. Unfortunately, it was financially very much underwater. If we, Vermont, Blue Cross Vermont, took on the full burden of loss for that Medicare Advantage book of business here in Vermont, we would not be sitting in front of you today. They absorbed double digits, millions of dollars in order to allow us to keep the folks insured and us to pay our claims debts through the duration of time that we need to. So 2 financial things they did for us that made a very meaningful difference for Vermonters. Over and above that, we work with Michigan with their expertise. We have connection points at every department within the Vermont organization where we have the equivalent person in Michigan where we can brainstorm new ideas. We can ask them what they have done in certain circumstances. They do the same with us. Some of the Vermont ideas they're very intrigued by. So it's a two-way street, but isn't it lovely to be able to have that type of expertise that you could share back and forth and only get stronger and better? The last thing I'll say about Michigan is they have a fully vetted list of vendors that they partner with, and with the Blue Cross organization that size this many, we need more vendors to help us do all the work that we do. They have a fully vetted list, legally and otherwise, and then we're able to leverage the Michigan and Vermont footprint of members together to get a better deal. So they're extending their contracts to us so that we're paying a lower price point for the things we need to do to make sure that we're a good health plan for all Vermonters. So Michigan has paid dividends to Vermont, if you will. It has been very important for our sustainability. In that Michigan affiliation deal, this is the biggest point I want to make. Not only are they excellent board members, which I didn't finish that thought, 3 of the Michigan board members are executives. The president and CEO of Blue Cross Michigan, which she is stellar and unbelievably smart and capable and helps us every day. So the president and CEO, the president of commercial business, and the president of emerging markets are the 3 roles from Michigan that are on our board. Wealth of knowledge. The other 2 Michigan roles are open for them to appoint, and they appointed 2 Michigan board members. So 2 of the members that are on their board are now having insight onto the Blue Cross Vermont board. So you can hear that 7 of the existing board members for our organization are Vermont, 5 are Michigan. I emphasize that because when we affiliated with Michigan, that board construct was decided. It is in our affiliation agreement. It is written in the affiliation agreement, and it was approved by DFI. So for a couple of years later to come back and try to change the composition of our board by either adding 2 or switching out 2 of those board members, first I would suggest to you the 2 that would have to be switched out would be the Vermonters. I believe you got the bios of the people on our board. I wouldn't have a clue who to take off that board. That board is an excellent board. So, and to add to, that changes the very essence of the affiliation agreement that we agreed to, again, approved by the regulators. So our Michigan affiliate is not very excited about this bill, as you can imagine. And leaning in really hard to say, we don't understand with the strength of the board you have, the strength of the financial backing, the strength of our collective efforts to do good for Vermont. Why are we even having this discussion? And they're having a hard time understanding that. And I've done my best to represent what I've heard, but I stand in front of you today or sit in front of you today suggesting the same thing. I am not understanding the value that 2 additional board members would come in and do to an already very strong board that was agreed to in our affiliation with Michigan. Okay. I am more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. That's really helpful. I have a series of questions.
Sure.
Because you've perked my interest. First of all, I know you weren't here directly, but when Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont affiliated with Michigan, what was DFR's role in that? What did they have to do? And I can ask them the same question.
No, it's okay, and you can, but they have to approve the entire thing, so it was, they were part of the process as we were going through the affiliation, and so they saw the full. Every document associated with it, and they were part of that entire process, and then they approved it at the end.
And that would have included the board composition. Okay. And what kind of ongoing oversight do you have with both DFR and I know you're sort of duly regulated a little bit, just with DFR and the Green Mountain Care Board. And are there regulators in Michigan that
No.
have any? Okay.
So, but to your point, I'm on the phone with DFR. I think that folks in the room would agree at least weekly, if not every other day. So we talk to our regulators all the time. They see our board minutes, our board agendas. They see all our financials. We go and we talk to them about anything that we want to do. I mean, it's a very open relationship with DFR. And frankly, we partner on many things. Like we have a lot of data and we use that data to inform how to move forward in certain things. So we talk to DFR all the time. And they see absolutely everything. That's the other thing that I'm glad you brought it up. I can't think of something that DFR doesn't see. And we took an inventory of it, and it's quite remarkable what we send to DFR. Green Mountain Care Board, certainly they regulate us as well on the rate hearing side. So when we create products and we need to get rates approved, we go in front of Green Mountain Care Board. We also get requests from the Green Mountain Care Board for data, similar on the Medicare initiative that's going on right now. They ask for data, so we go and respond via data a lot with the Green Mountain Care this one.
And you know, Vermont has a ton of nonprofit organizations, and I know you're a somewhat unique nonprofit organization, but not all nonprofit board members understand their duties, especially their fiduciary duties. Sometimes people get it because they believe in the cause, but then they realize, oh wait, we have to actually balance the budget and hire a CEO or hold the CEO accountable. And do you have training and criteria for the board members who are appointed so that it's somebody who has the skills and the knowledge to be able to actually do the job that is necessary?
Yes.
Could you describe what those are?
Sure. So first, the process to select board members includes a rigorous set of criteria. First, one thing that was agreed to in the affiliation, as well as every single Blue Cross Vermont board member needs to have Blue Cross Vermont insurance. So they have a perspective of being a member of our organization as well as being somebody in the community. So the first thing we do is we do look for people in more senior or executive roles that either run their own business or have very strong influence in their own business. We look for different types of backgrounds. So for example, when we lose Charlie Smith, our board chair, who's retiring at the end of the year, we look for, okay, what is the role that Charlie has been playing? And in his particular instance, he does know Vermont government very well because he sat in AHS for quite some time. So if we lose somebody with a finance background, we look to recruit somebody in the finance area. If we use a lawyer on the board, we look for somebody who's a lawyer. So we definitely try to round out the gaps based on who's already on the board today. Then we go through we have a list of 10 right now to fill Charlie's seat. We then go through and we distill it down based on criteria of what those various folks bring to the table to the 3. And then we do interviews with board chair, myself, and another board member. And then we onboard them very thoroughly. So we have a full onboarding so that they understand the responsibility of both mission and fiduciary.
And how do you remove a board member if they're not fulfilling their duties?
I've been here long enough. I mean, we have board criteria on that. We haven't found that to be the case. So we have not had to remove somebody on the board. And so I can certainly get you that policy. I really don't know, so I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And that would be helpful if you could get that. And then, I think we're all aware of the financial issues that have been plaguing Blue Cross Blue Shield for the last few years, and it's good that you're sort of coming out of that. But Are there any recommendations you would have for further regulatory measures that could be done perhaps in addition to or instead of this board seat proposal? What could we do? What could DFR, Green Mountain Care Board, or the legislature, or whomever, or the governor, whomever, do better so that this wouldn't happen again?
I really sit in front of you today not knowing a good answer to that, because I really believe that if BFR asked us for absolutely anything, they would get it. I mean, they see absolutely everything. I don't know what else there is to potentially manage or control. So when you talk about the financial standing of the organization, some of that happened nationally. And I know it hit really hard here in Vermont. But when you hear people talk about a claim surge and how we went from being okay, still not financially perfect, but okay, to in a really tough spot, that happened at a time of the claim surge that happened nationally.
Yeah.
It was just, so it is really hard to predict when that is going to happen. And consultants, insurance companies across the board, all did not get that prediction correctly. So I am not sure by adding a board member, any type of board member, that would have been predicted any better. So that was really what happened to us in the financial crisis, was that claim surge. And going in front, getting insurance rates approved every year through the Green Mountain Care Board. They go through a very diligent process, but you will see in the record that we needed rate increases greater than we were given for quite a few years before we realized this claim surge then just put us totally upside down. So our insurance rates couldn't climb to cover the claim cost. And yes, we have claim cost issues in the state, which we're working on very diligently, but so it's hard for me to say what else could be done, because I really think DFR sees absolutely everything about our business model and our business. So I'm not sure what else we could do to make that anything stronger or better.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, it's starting to feel like old times in here. I know the advocate, but we're not done with this bill, so we'll catch you. We were just longer than we were supposed to be.
I am sorry.
It's not your fault.
So, thank you. This has been very helpful.
You're almost welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you. Just you. Sorry, lunch. Okay.
I'll connect you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we're running up. I'm already getting deadlines, like miscellaneous checks that like out by the 17th. Wow.
That's next week.
I know, that's what I said. So,
They get a week.
Representative Kimball, you want to walk us through?
At least give you an introduction.
Yeah,
Yes.
really 2000 foot one.
Yes, this should be a very light topic for you, Madam Chair. So hi, for the record, name is Charlie Kimball, representative from Woodstock, Virginia, Woodstock, Reading and Plymouth. So I'm here on 8933, which is miscellaneous tax bill. It's a 64 section bill. So my floor report was only 17 pages, and it took me only 10 minutes to deliver it, so it was a rapid fire. But I want to highlight for you.
Sure, everyone knew what they were voting on.
Absolutely. But there are really three key parts to it. The first is money. So it's about linking the Vermont tax code to the federal Internal Revenue Code. JFO worked with PACS very closely, and also Vermont Chamber and outside organizations to figure out what the impact of HR 1 passed July 1st, 2025 was on Vermont revenues. And as you know, the original estimate was that it wasn't going to be that much, but looking at it in greater detail, the estimate was about $21 million in fiscal year 26. So set about looking at the different elements of HR 1 and what we could selectively decouple from. So there are a couple of major points of that. One was really dealing with foreign income for corporations, section 250 deduction, and that's what they could deduct from their income. And others regarded the research and experimentation deduction that companies could also take. And and also bonus depreciation on the purchase of some kind of buildings and really around both farming and chemical manufacturing. So anyway, we selectively decoupled from a number of those things, which actually then provided some positive revenue into the state by doing that from projections.
And I believe that 21 million plus or minus dollars, we did not know about when the revenue forecast was done, so it is spent in the governor's and the House's budget.
That's right, Madam Chair. We did not know that the 21 million would be negative, right?
So we spent it in there.
Available and need word that, is that what you're referring to?
Mhm.
Yes, okay. Okay.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Was that
So
that estimate?
it's in the governor's revenue forecast.
So, okay, got it.
So the extra money that was then freed up from decoupling was then used for a couple of different things. One is the increasing the research and development tax credit for businesses that are domiciled in Vermont, going to 75% of the federal amount, which is the highest in the country, as really an incentive for those businesses to continue to do research and development here. About 184 companies that take advantage of that credit currently, all across, names you recognize, names you might not. Also looked at the downtown village center tax credits, increasing that by $1 million, actually permanently in statute, not one time. And also looking at renewing the down payment assistance program through VHFA. So that's been a very successful program to create wealth.
Residential down payment?
Yes.
assistance?
Yes, residential down payment assistance, $350,000 a year, maxes out to about $1.8 million when the 5-year tax credit overlaps with others. The other part of the money is, so that increases the amount of revenue coming to the general fund, but then we also are trying to make up for the request to move money from the ed fund back into the transportation fund. And as you know, the governor had asked for gradual reduction in the purchase and use tax revenue. So this reduces the amount of revenue going to the ed fund from purchase and use by $10 million. It makes up the hole in the ed fund by moving more money from the rooms and meals tax into the ed fund. So it changes the percentages as to what is actually then remitted into one fund versus the other. So it ends up being net neutral in terms of revenue for both the ed fund. Transportation fund does get more revenue, so it can pull down more money from the federal government. So that is the money piece.
The general fund would have to take a hit there, right?
Yeah.
The general fund does take a hit from the rooms and sales tax, made up for by that decoupling from the federal taxes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It also has technical changes. This bill does. There's 24 sections that change the word April to January. It's very important, but it's actually for the grand list maintenance and
And it does that on many. There's many of those changes.
Yeah,
Yes.
a whole bunch of pages. Can I ask a question about that? So I don't know if you were here, so this also might be a question for JFO or at Pledge Council, but I remember that we changed some of those, maybe not all of those, a couple of years ago when we did work on appraisals. And I thought we maybe changed it to April, but do you know what I'm talking about? We made some change with some of the tax appraisal dates.
Yeah.
Because they were out of sync with property tax payments. And I was trying to remember, I was reading the bill earlier today. I was trying to remember what we did.
Yeah, I believe let's give more color on that history, but
Ruby's nodding, so.
yeah. So, and there are several parts throughout statute where it had to be corrected to actually go from April to January. And that gives listers
Yeah.
more time to hear appeals so that in July, when you have to really have your list finalized, then that information is all done. The appeal period is over and everything else.
And were there any objections from clerks? Because I know January 1st is a tough day for clerks because they're not there, and then
Yeah.
did they object to that?
We did not have any objections this year when we made this bill. We had a lot of conversations with folks last session
Yeah,
about the changes and the regional assessment districts and the appeal process and everything else. It's a separate bill, but we didn't have objections to this in this bill.
We
Okay.
will, yeah. from the
The
clerk.
clerk's association, yeah.
In the list.
I mean, it might be fine because they're not actually doing it on January first,
Right,
but
but,
yeah, but it just breaks it.
Okay.
Maybe an orange flag, not quite a red.
Okay.
Another thing that's in here is to fund JFO to do the 10-year tax study, the decennial tax study. This will be the fourth done over 40 years. And that is to really measure what kind of income tax and other taxes Vermont has in comparison to the other states. Is there tax flight that results because of it? And to the extent that we can identify where there are benefit programs that intersect with what the income cutoffs are. So that's could be an additional study that we want to do after that. So it's really a thorough analysis of where we are with all of the taxes we have in Vermont and coming back to the legislature in December. So it's $100,000 application to joint fiscal office to hire a consultant and do the work. So it's a considerable amount of work that needs to be
Did
done.
this go through your appropriations committee?
It did,
Okay.
it did. And they loved it. No, it's seriously, they,
Ours still called the butcher and he's nailing everything to the wall. So
terrific. Yeah.
this one will take several stops. Okay.
Sweeney Todd and so on. And that's a very high overview. There are several other sections that are in there. Some of it is language just to make sure that statute conforms to what we're doing on the budget side from the Budget Adjustment Act and what's in the 2027 budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, and I'll hang around if you have questions for Ledge Council.
Let's hope. We have time for questions. Okay. Kirby, you're the lead on this. Patrick and Chris. Everybody's working on this. Okay.
Right, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Is that convincing? Senator Chitlins accused me of sounding sarcastic a couple of times.
Son of boy convincing her.
All right.
All right.
I'm just tired.
Yeah.
So,
Penman?
no, that's okay. We have the bill here, as passed by the House, page 933, Kirby Key Legislative Council. I've also, shared with Charlotte a section by section summary. I'll show you the bill language, as we go through. There are parts that are very, so I have a couple of just preface things. There are parts that are obviously very weedy and dense, and probably anticipate we don't have time during this initial walkthrough to go into all of that. So, plan to hit on the high stuff and probably have to revisit it. And with that, I would say that between Pat and I, Pat has done wonderful work on this. Chris has done wonderful work on this. When it comes to the corporate income tax stuff or just the income tax stuff in general, Pat and I have both given presentations and ways and means on various aspects, and we can always come back and provide some of that information. Also just want to flag that I have started an amendment in the case that you do have any changes, because there's a few technical tweaks.
Okay.
So just to make you aware of that at the outset, there are a couple of tweaks I'd like to make.
Thing I might like to add at this point is I haven't got any answers back from the property valuation. I have of the town of Warren has development that went up in the 1950s, 60s, like with eighth of an acre camps. And we've put an amount of tax due before you could go to tax sale. Well, the taxes on the total taxes on these are like $200 or $100. Half of them are in estates, or the people have forgotten they even own them. The town would like to be able to turn this back into a piece of property that could be developed, which in some cases means going to tax sale before it reaches, is it 1900 or some dollars?
1,500
Something, yeah, something over 1,000. And I'm trying to figure out a way to do that without creating a huge loophole. So if y'all can think on that. I know that Representative Kornheiser was thinking of going to a percentage. I was thinking on if the lot is not marketable, under present. But just, that's the one, and they're very persistent over there, so. I'm just thinking about, is there a way we could help them, achieve
I'm
that
gonna walk
goal?
through the whole bill.
Yeah, we're gonna go through it. I just,
Before we
if
start
you
talking about all the
amendments, I
math.
wanted to get the best minds in the State House thinking about that. To see if we can find a solution that
Okay.
would help them just get this problem solved.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about that. So I'll get into the walkthrough. Section 1 repeals, a section of law, current law. By the way, I'll tell you when we depart from it, but the beginning of this is going to be requesting the department. As the miscellaneous tax bill tends to start with the administrative request that they do.
Okay.
So this is an administrative request from the department, from the beginning of the session. Where we have a section of law that denies tax credits for S corporations for taxes paid to another state. The history of this apparently is it goes back to the 1990s where the department lost a court case over a tax credit for an S corporation and it was unhappy and asked to have the law changed. And so we're in a state now where LLCs and partnerships are able to receive a tax credit for their Vermont taxes for credit for taxes paid in another state, but S corporations are not because of this.
Law that
Yeah.
we did because we already have.
There was, yeah, the deputy commissioner referred to it as revenge. I thought revenge is not part of their mission anymore. So that's why that's there, and that's a department request. Section 2 relates to the property transfer tax. If you remember a couple of sessions ago, my first session, we made changes to the transfer tax to have a higher rate for transfers of properties that were going to be used as second homes was the goal, even though it's not directly called out for that higher transfer tax rate.
Well, it was small parcels.
And part of that related to, you could avoid having the higher rate if it was going to be rented out, and it was kind of the landlord certificate, which the landlord certificate is required if it's going to be rented out for long term for more than 30 days. Law firms within the state, some of them have caught on to the idea that, well, if we can have you rent it out for 30 days, if we can, and there's lots of ways for us to figure out how to do that, then you can get this transfer and not have the higher rate applied to you because you're either renting it out to a family member or yourself, or you're having maybe an LLC purchase the property and then rent it to you. And so to avoid these
Creativity.
creative attempts to work around, all is perfectly legal because it fits within the way it was written. And I remember conversations in this room about this possibility.
They always have
Well, I think
more
that
creative
you mentioned that.
outcomes than we do.
Yeah, so it was not unforeseen, but it's happening. And the department would like language added in section 2 here that would allow an department when they go to do compliance, look at those transactions, and if they're not bona fide landlord tenant situations, that they can deny the rate and apply the higher. So that's section 2. Sections 3 and 4 relate to land use change tax and current use. There's an issue.
One quick one on that, just real quick.
Sure.
What if it goes the other way? What if somebody purchases a property, pays the higher property transfer tax? 6 months later, they go, no, I'm gonna rent it. Can they go back to the state and say, hey, actually, I'm renting it?
I think the department could speak to that best, but at least in theory, there's a refund process where they could request it. And they said, as it turns out, I did qualify for this other rate. How the department would handle that is better than the second.
Okay.
Thank you.
So sections 3 and 4 relate to land use change tax. I'm gonna try to speed up. There's an issue when it comes to current use, when a portion of a parcel is being unenrolled or being developed under current law, the portion that's being unenrolled from the program has to be valued as its own separate parcel. And then land use change tax is calculated based on the value of that slice, right? Which requires a valuation to be done specifically for this trend, for this change each time. And it's municipal assessing officials who are in charge of doing those valuations, and some municipalities don't have the capacity to do that very quickly. And so PBR has suggested making these changes so that if 30 days pass and the municipality is not able to do it, PBR could step in and do it. And then it sets out a process for that, for basically PBR doing these valuations to speed things up. And there's also a provision here where under current law, the municipality gets a payment for doing that, but it would not receive the payment if PBR is doing it.
And where does the payment come from?
It's up to $2,000 of the land use change tax could be.
Oh, okay. Okay. That would just stay with the state then. If PBR does, okay.
And section 4 is also part of that. Which is a conforming change for appeals. And then in section 5, there's changes to the calculation for municipal grand list stabilization. If you recall in the recent sessions, there's this new municipal grand list stabilization program that was created to reimburse municipalities for property taxes lost when they purchase flooded or flood prone properties. But then those properties get taken off the grand list. So for 10 years, the state reimburses some of the lost grand list value there. The calculation change here is to use the tax rates for the previous year instead of the current year, which is in line with how pilot payments are calculated. And so it's really just a math related request. Section 6 adds provisions addressing cases where communication service providers fail to submit inventory to PBR for property valuation. So also recently the law was changed so that PBR would start to do the valuation for communication properties for those businesses. So they're starting to do the valuation for that. It hasn't really started yet, but they noticed that there's nothing in the law currently about any repercussions for basically business not participating under this, under the way that this works. The businesses have to submit inventories of their property for PBR to do the valuation. So it introduces the same penalties that had previously existed for that, which is a fine of not more than $100 for each violation.
That's all we missed in that bill. No, Senator Harding, were you here? I think it was 279.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
And
a long and complex bill and somewhat of a disagreement between the House and the Senate, so.
there was testimony that they don't anticipate that any businesses are going to receive any penalty, but it's going to work fine.
Just
And
encouragement to do the right thing, okay? Senator,
You skipped over a paragraph in that section, and I had some people reach out to me of that second one, scrolling down, about the ability to appeal. Or is there any thoughts? So the legitimate concern that they should be barred from any statutory or appeal. And so I think we should hear from PBR. There's concerns that this is still being worked out. And so to take away their appeal rights while the kinks are being addressed, I think the request from advocates, and I'd love to know what PBR's thoughts are, is to push the effective date of this out a year. As opposed to where it currently is. I'm looking at these third line 17 shall be barred from any statutory appeal. That just seems a little extreme when they're still working through the case.
I highlighted the language I highlighted just to show that that happens if the provider willfully omits to make, swear, or submit inventory. If they submit an inventory and then there's disagreement over it, that would not trigger this, for clarity.
If we could hear from Jill Cormack.
I
Yep.
don't think so. Okay. Yes, we do.
Moving on, section 7, equalization study. There's just some language here clarifying that for CHIP sites, for the purpose of the equalization study, it would be done the same as TIF districts. Section 8 also relates to the equalization study and changes it so that if a municipality has just finished a mass reappraisal, under current law, the PDR still has to apply this calculation that's here to determine what their CLA will be. This changes it so that the municipality would have a CLA of 100 the year following the mass reappraisal, and there wouldn't be a calculation that could result in getting a slightly different than 100 at each result.
Yeah, I've seen it like 112 this year after they did the reappraisal.
Yeah.
It doesn't do common sense. It seems like if you have an appraisal, you should be starting at base 100. So that,
Sections 9 and 10 extend the health IT fund for 5 more years. It's set to sunset in 2026. This pushes us to 2031.
Can you remind us what that is?
I can
we'll get.
very little do I know, but
Testimony, probably.
it's IT costs for
Help.
health in the hospital.
Good, Kirby.
Yeah.
Good job.
Pittsburgh Vital,
Jen Carby probably could have helped. She
Pittsburgh
knows,
Vital, PITO.
Oh, okay.
but there's, the healthcare claims tax is part of this. That's it.
That was a little sarcastic.
Okay,
Oh, my. Oh, no, but seriously, Jen Carby would be
Yeah.
the person to know,
Yeah.
the ins and outs of that.
don't give them hard. Okay, so I'm 11 to 14.
11 to 14 is, this is in some of the ed finance sections of the law. And it changes the inflators used in various places, from using NEAP over to NIPA. NIPA is the National Income and Product Accounts, implicit price deflator. NEAP does not exist anymore. It's not something that's available. And so in practice, NIPA is what's been used. And so this is making the statute reflect actual practice.
Is the US Department of Commerce gonna actually continue to do this one, given that they're not?
No idea, except that, I think that there is a study underway on inflators. Like a JFO study underway on inflators.
Yeah.
And so I imagine this might be for business.
Okay,
Kirby, you scrolled past something that's kind of caught in base education amount. Was that a change or did I just,
Where,
I don't know, you scrolled by it.
Line 12.
Oh, yeah, line 12. No, okay, I know what that is. Yep. Okay, no worries. Just caught my eye.
that's the concern with sort of any of these pieces. People notice things that aren't,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries.
yeah, sorry. Okay, so
Great, almost.
Section 15 allows the property tax credit to be calculated using 100% of the this is so far we've gone through tax department requests. This one is the taxpayer advocate specifically. The only request from the taxpayer advocate this year was to change the homestead declaration property tax credit calculation so that people who are in the process of getting a divorce or a legal separation, there's, in those cases, you'll often have both of the people would still be owners on the property. And at least under the letter of the law, if one of them's living in the homestead and the other one's living somewhere else, that means one of the owners is living somewhere else. So only half of the tax credit would go to the person living there. This is something that the taxpayer advocate said that they addressed through extraordinary relief when it comes up and requests are made to them. But they've asked to just have the law changed so they don't have to do extraordinary relief in these cases.
then there is a free chair over here. We haven't been this crowded in a long. Oh,
Oh,
it's not. Just go. Let's keep going.
let's keep going. Section 16, it aligns the estate tax filing threshold with the tax liability threshold. This is a department request. Under current law, if an estate is, if the sum of the federal gross estate and the federal adjusted taxable gifts as defined under federal law, made within 2 years of the day that Justin's death exceeds 2.75 million, then there's, under current law, you have to file a Vermont state tax return. But if that estate isn't worth more than 5 million, no tax is actually owed. So the department has asked to make the tax liability threshold be the same as this filing threshold, so that they will stop getting what they call zero returns, which are returns submitted, but in which no tax is due. But still something that they have to process.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of paperwork that, so. Seventeen.
Section 17 is the down payment assistance program that Representative Kimball mentioned. So this will extend the program through 2031 and also increase the annual allocations from 250,000 per year to 350,000 per year. And as Representative Kimball mentioned, these allocations each allocation is for 5 years, so it's 350 per year over 5 years. In each of those years between 2027 and 2031, and I believe it's something that Jennifer will show you a cool
Yeah,
chart.
I need, probably a good thing it's on the wall. Because we did something similar in the housing bill, I believe, so these may, they're either similar or the same, so I wanna.
But it was taken out. It's on the wall.
Well, everything is on the wall
Yeah.
over there, and
It's got a huge wall.
I know Andrew has a huge wall with lots of things tacked to it.
Because this
I
one's a
just
year.
want to make sure that they all get put together in one place, so it doesn't look like there's 100,000, you know, that there's a double dip. If it's only a single dip, it's more likely to happen. So, see if we can get that one. Okay.
Section 18 brings us to a topic that you're familiar with because
Yes,
there's a Senate version of something similar.
yes, this is the new federal $1,700 tax credit.
Exactly, for contributions to scholarship granting organizations. Fun fact with this one, this language we're about to look at is from a floor amendment. So this is not the Ways and Means version of this.
Okay,
Was it in the bill when it went to the floor? Was it added in?
It was in the bill and changed on the floor.
Changed on the floor, okay.
okay,
Originally, Ways and Means more or less said Vermont's not going to participate in this. On the floor, they changed it to, I'll go through the language.
Okay.
But the gist of it is Vermont will participate, but the legislature will be the decision maker and year to year decide if it's going to participate.
okay. Going to participate and in what form? Because the bill we had
I'll show
in
you.
here wouldn't,
The bill you had in here was Vermont can participate and the governor can be the entity identifying SGOs within Vermont. But the SGOs that can be identified are going to be limited to a smaller group than what the feds would allow. So all three are good.
and the holdup was that the IRS hasn't issued guidelines or.
IRS has not issued guidelines which could affect the types of expenses that will be allowed for contributions and possibly the extent to which a state can limit SGO participation. So there's some findings here, which is just calling out some things about section 25F and Title 26 of the federal law. And then the actual change is, says that annually, the General Assembly may elect to participate in the federal tax credit program in the following year by enactment of an act. The timing of this, you should be aware, is a little odd because these lists have to be submitted before January 1. So under this, you would be deciding, let's say 2026 right now, you would be deciding what is, not only will Vermont participate next year, but what are the SGOs that you'll recognize? But it will be for all the way until next year. So whatever you decide at this time of year would be actually submitted to the
Federal
feds at
tax,
the end of the
it
year.
would be next year's
Mhm.
federal taxes that you could take. All right,
Well, it would be the SGOs that are eligible to
Yeah.
contribute to next year.
okay.
So
You take
just
the
because
federal
of,
tax credit, it just can't go to anything in Vermont until we set up an SGO here, right?
until through this language, until the legislature has identified this particular organization
Yeah.
qualifies. So next calendar year, people can contribute to it for purposes of the federal credit.
That's
So
okay.
effectively, Vermont's out for 2027 because the legislature is not gonna be able to.
There's an interesting provision in the federal law that for the first year, there's not that hard deadline of January 1.
Yeah.
For the first year, it says as soon as practicable.
Okay.
So there's a bit of an open question.
Okay.
At how late will the IRS would allow Vermont to be next year is a question that I'm not sure the answer to. But it's possible you pass something next session and federal law would allow a late submission during the legislative session next year.
Yeah.
So I think it's an important point as this conversation goes on. Even if we pass this language, making the legislature have to take action, Vermonters would still be able to take advantage of this credit by sending this money to other states' SGOs.
Yeah.
If there are not Vermont SGOs, Vermonters could still contribute to their state's SGOs, even if there are Vermont SGOs.
But if this language passes, that Vermonters will still be able to send theirs, and even if it passes, they can send that $1,700 to any other SGO in the country.
Yeah, whether it passes or not, they can do it.
Okay,
If nothing passes, then federal law allows the governor to participate. Also, yeah, thank you. I think you know that. Okay, so I think we've covered how this is to work. So I don't need to dwell on that anymore.
spent a fair amount of time. Yes. Okay. 21 through 23. That where we are,
2020.
or 20?
Section 20.
Now, but
No, that's.
I think I left
Yeah,
20 off
yeah.
section by section.
Definition.
Oh. 20.
Definition of parcel is, this is something that was in Act 73 last year. It's kind of been pulled out of it because it was never part of educational reform. It was a technical request for the state mapping agency
Okay,
that for the purpose of the grand list for mapping and for parcel payments, parcel means a separate sellable lot or piece of real estate. So you're changing the definition of parcel when it comes to the grand list here. So that when it comes to property valuation and property taxes, it's being left alone. For purposes of mapping though, it would have the grand list state each parcel separately and sellable lot of piece of real estate. That means that you would not combine parcels that are next to one another, adjacent to one another that have the same ownership. Currently go on the grand list as if they were one parcel,
I own
But
the
this
lot next
changes
to
that.
my house.
just for mapping,
I haven't divided
Mapping.
state mapping.
the GSI maps.
Okay, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
mapping happening right now.
This is the general, John Adams.
Yeah, so if there are two parcels next to each other owned by, these are my two parcels, I own this one and this one. Right now, they're combined says Ruth Hardy owned both of these parcels, but this change would make it so they're two, yeah,
For taxation, it would still be as if you own one of them
uh,
for taxation purposes. But for mapping purposes, that information, that data would at least be on the grant list, so that when they go to map, they'll know that there's actually
two parcels there.
Currently, that's a blind spot in their mapping.
Okay, interesting. That could be helpful.
We'll ask John to come in and
Yeah,
explain it. All right. Yes, we
Okay.
finally got to a controversial section.
Um,
Or maybe
All right.
not in this room, but in general.
yeah, let's do it. It's fine. Section 21 through 23. Fish and wildlife. fees.
that's from one of our attorneys.
You would say that. All right, so section 21 through 23 limits the Department of Fish and Wildlife's fee setting authority to licenses and tuition for certain uses and prohibits a license for public access. The backstory here is, or just the general overview, what's going on here is that it's for next year, starting next year, it would remove the fee setting authority that Fish and Wildlife has specific for access to their lands and property. There's other licenses and fees that are out there, that it's not all of them, it's those ones, right? And in the meantime, this would have the department come back before next session and submit something to the legislature to say, would you put into statute these fees for us? And then the General Assembly will have next session to decide whether to accept that. But it would be a process of starting to put the fees relating to access to fish and wildlife properties into statute.
Because unlike most other departments, Fish and Wildlife has the ability to set some fees, right? Like the rates for a campground at the state parks. I guess they do set fish and wildlife licenses, hunting and fishing licenses. But last year they announced that they were going to put a fee on for using essentially hiking, snowmobiling, whatever on state lands. I assume just walking on state lands. Some people felt that might be overstepping their traditional ability to regulate. So I gather this is the House's compromise. It's no for this year, but you need to come to the legislature. Because these are essentially public lands.
Yep, and so their fees are set through rule right now, and those rules under this language are being left alone for now, and it's next year that they would be repealed and replaced. And you mentioned the hunting fees, those fees are already in statute for Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah.
It's the access to public land fees here,
This is the new-
where they have a more general authority over. And as far as other places in the law, I'm aware Parks and Rec, or Forest and Parks having a similar fee setting authority. And then I think storage preservation, there's fee setting authority around that. Otherwise,
I remember setting fees like to go into the Battle of Bennington Monument or entry to the Kent Museum. That, yeah.
I tried looking at that a little bit, and it just became
Yeah.
probably the quaintest area of law we have, where it's just, cute little battlefields and stuff, like.
Okay, so that will come back next year.
I believe what I heard this morning was, I don't know if you were still in the room, stand your back, but they made up the fees in the budget. They gave them a little general fund to replace the fees. Yeah, that's what I,
Okay,
so that they're whole.
they don't have a whole,
They don't have a whole, they got some general fund to share.
okay.
So I think we've covered those 3 sections. So the next 24 sections, 24 through 48, relate to the change of the grand list submission date from April 1 to January 1. Representative Kimball brought this up. This is meant to be a change that's at least related to the RADs, the regional assessment districts, and other reforms around property valuation. With the idea being that if the grand list is submitted on January 1, then that would give you between January 1 and April 1 to do appeals, to do a lot of the administrative process that takes place with the grand list. So it gives more time for municipalities, especially, to do their parts of things. So it's meant to be helpful.
Because after the floods, we had to extend those appeal dates because there were so many appeals from flood damage that the boards of civil authority couldn't process them, and they are volunteer boards.
Right.
So you can only push them so hard.
So, yeah, so there is the first opportunity to appeal when it comes to property valuation would be the grievance process, which is informal. And then that could lead to a formal appeal with the municipality. So yes, there's more time for all of that before you get into like summer and fall where there's other deadlines.
So you should have more set grand list by the time you come to sending out property tax bills. You shouldn't still have things in conflict.
I think that's the hope is, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you remember what I was remembering that we changed some of these when we did the first
I was thinking,
property assessment?
I was thinking that maybe you were referring to some changes that were made with homestead declarations and extending the time at which those can be amended, maybe.
Okay. I remember it was like an October to April change or something like that. Was that?
That's why I'm
that
thinking
iteration?
that
Okay,
because
okay.
October 15 is the homestead deadline.
Yeah, because people were not getting their tax credit because they were missing the deadline on, okay, that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, section 49 is a tax department request to remove parts of statute that have PVR overseeing tax collection. PVR is not currently doing that.
Have they ever?
Back when it was its own department, it seems like maybe there was at least
Okay.
an idea at some point that they would do that, but it's not something that they participate in at this point. So they've asked to have that removed.
Okay.
Sections 50 through 53 are another change from the House floor. There were some sections here that were going to take part of the pilot special fund revenues or money that's in the fund to pay for some PVR fees related to per parcel fees for municipalities that help with the equalization study, that and then the grand list maintenance work that they do, and then there's a per parcel fee to help pay for master appraisals. And so it's going to shift those fees from general fund to being paid for through the pilot special fund. Turns out some folks in the House didn't like that. They have different ideas for the pilot special fund. So it was dropped.
Everybody has ideas for the pilot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah. And yeah,
How much money we're talking about?
I think there's a Senate transportation bill that has ideas for it.
Yes, they have ideas. They have ideas for lots of funds, but
So that's what's missing there. Section 54 is the Vermont 10-year tax study that Representative Kimball mentioned. This would be something conducted by, JFO. And it's something that's been done before. And there's $100,000 appropriation for it. And with that, though, I think, JFO is gonna talk about it and they'll be doing it. Things best, but it doesn't
10-year,
just brought that.
conduct a 10-year study on Vermont taxes.
Mhm.
I assume the study's not going to last 10 years. It's going to be a study of 10 years. of Vermont.
It'll sit on the shelf for 10 years until we don't smoke.
But Chris is gonna work on it
This will be the third
remotely.
in my time in this building.
It'll sit on our
First one
website.
was really good. The second one, I want to make sure we word this correct.
It's not like the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission thing.
Okay,
It's not like that. It's a JFO study. It's
It's a
not that. It's
JFO
not a
study. okay.
It's not partisan. Is JFO one person?
Yes, JFO is not partisan. I think I've read that somewhere. No, the first one, the commission was very balanced. In the middle, Michael Costa was the director, and I think it was his first job here. And there were some very conservative people and some very liberal people on there, but we asked them very specifically to look at our tax structure, relative to our ability to be competitive with surrounding states. So the next one just kind of did its own thing. And I just want to make sure that we're clear in the wording, because the second one never really.
So
I
again, this
think what-
is not that.
Yeah.
This is not that. This is
Yeah.
JFO doing
Okay.
an analysis.
It's gonna be fun.
So, section 55 has a lot. Has a lot. It changes, our income tax, definitions. And it is the part of the bill that, where the decoupling mostly occurs.
Wait, the corporate tax?
Decoupling from the federal law on certain, areas of income tax. So
Okay, personal or corporate?
both.
Alright,
A lot of the changes are applied to individual or to personal income tax and corporate.
Okay.
There's one that is personal income tax only because it's not something available on corporate income taxes
okay,
at the federal level. I'm gonna go through them to kind of set the stage though, as a reminder. HR 1, passed last July 4th is when it was signed, last July 4th, and had over 100 sections of changes to the federal tax code.
okay,
Pat and I and Department of Taxes have worked to make sure that we understand everything that was happening and to identify the things that would flow through to Vermont. We did that. Ways and Means worked on this and walked through all of the things that could impact Vermont. And this is 5 or 6 areas where Vermont would decouple. And so there's also the annual link up here, which means that all of those other changes that happened are one that Vermont will couple to.
okay,
So I don't want that to be lost to think that, like, when it comes to all those changes, Vermont is coupling to most of them.
right,
And a lot of the changes also did not flow through Vermont, so there's nothing to couple or decouple from.
okay.
So just make sure that, that's
So we
understood.
will spend a great deal of time on coupling or decoupling.
And
This is probably the one that has the most monetary impact.
mhm.
And the one where we will want to put, yes.
So to give you the quick version with, completely assuming that if Pat and I, this would be back to talk about this more, of course. I'll just give you the quick versions of the things, if that's okay, for today. Okay, so the first one is, Representative Kimball mentioned that, HR1 started allowing something called bonus depreciation for qualified production property was the term used. Currently, Vermont is decoupled from bonus depreciation for business personal property. So there's already some precedent for Vermont decoupling from federal when the feds allow bonus depreciation. Bonus depreciation is allowing depreciation on property to be done all in the first year. So to take all of the depreciation off your taxes in the first year. Otherwise, depreciation for property would be done using these tables the IRS has. For this qualified production property, it's all non-residential real property. So under the IRS tables, it would be 39 years is how long it should normally take to depreciate that property. The bonus depreciation that was allowed under HR1 would be, so 39 years, it could all be depreciated in the first year. So a deduction for all that value in the first year. There's a bunch of rules that come with it, of course, and the property has to be held for a certain amount of time and other things like that. That's the difference. And so it's a timing of when those deductions are allowed to be taken. So a timing of when there's going to be a revenue hit as far as how much property tax collected, right? So one change is that under this language, Vermont's not allowing that, but Vermont is allowing regular depreciation, just not allowing the bonus depreciation.
Whatever number of years is in the table.
And just like with current law, how Vermont doesn't allow bonus depreciation for the business personal property, Vermont has allowed the regular kind of depreciation. One change though that the language is making is we're trying to flesh out, and this is where the tax department has been extremely helpful. Cannot say enough how helpful they've been in working with staff here to make sure that we're getting this all right and that it's a good place where there's not a lot of confusion and where everything's well settled. That said, in the past, when we decoupled from bonus depreciation, the drafting was in this part on taxable income, it says, without regard to 26 USC section 168K. That's the business personal property bonus depreciation. That without regard is pulling a lot of work because there's a lot of questions that come out of like, well, what do you mean? Like, can we depreciate it at all? Can we do this? Can we do that? So we do have language now that not only addresses the qualified production property bonus depreciation that's being decoupled from, but also the bonus depreciation that we've already decoupled from. So that's a change that's in here. The second thing that the language was decoupled from is changes at the federal law relating to domestic research and experimental procedures. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had made a change so that before Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, domestic research and experimental procedures had 2017. There was a deduction that could be taken all at once for your expenses for those, and Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed it so that businesses actually had to amortize it over 5 years. So they had spread out the deduction for those expenses over 5 years instead of taking it all in 1 year. HR1 reverts back to the old way. And so it started allowing businesses to take those expenditures all in 1 year for that deduction. Because it's been amortized up until for the last few years, this was going to be a big revenue hit specifically for this year because all of the past expenses could have been taken all at once. So the way that this is being handled here is Vermont is decoupling from the change to allow those expenses to be deducted all in the first year, but it's keeping the amortization over the 5 years. For the businesses that are considered small businesses. Or wait, small businesses they're allowing immediately, right?
At Tiverton Joint Fiscal Office, yeah, so small businesses can fully claim in the year the expenses were incurred. For larger ones, it's the amortization schedule.
Yeah, thank you, Pat.
And small business, the 200 employees.
In this case, small business means gross receipts of 31 million.
Okay,
And that's also indexed for inflation, and it refers to the federal definitions for that.
okay.
So again, thanks to Pat for my moment of panic there. Where I'm like, wait, I'm missing something. Small businesses can take it immediately. They get to use the federal treatment. In other words, not decoupling for those, only decoupling for the businesses that have gross receipts of more than 31 million. And in that case, they're going to follow the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act treatment and amortize those expenses for 5 years. And we also have a lot written in here to cover the situations like when a business has gross receipts over and under 31 million, and it's moving back and forth. And so there's a lot we had to consider for that. And you know, that was part was really helpful. But we do have language to cover those situations, and it's covered in a logical way where if a business becomes a small business, they can start expensing all at once, but not for the previous years. They will continue to amortize,
Okay.
and then vice
About
versa.
5 years for the stuff you got last year, but this year.
Last year, you were a big business and had to amortize, and you're going to continue to amortize those expenses.
Big business, but this year you're a small business.
This year, you're a small business, so you can actually, for this year's expenses, you can amortize it all now, or you can deduct it all now.
Okay.
Deduct it. Another area where this language decouples is something called the Section 250 deductions at the federal level. Under Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there were 2 types of income that corporations could have from their activities outside the US. Try to avoid getting into the weeds of all of that. And just say that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act tried to identify certain types of foreign income that were related to U.S. corporations through ownership and controlling foreign corporations and such. And the first attempt, at least it was written as if to try to get at, partially to get at like intellectual property that was held overseas, and the stuff that was getting moved around. And that was kind of the policy logic for starting to tax this new area. HR 1 changed it. For one thing, they more or less stopped pretending like it was about intangible property and just said, well, you know what? We just think that some of that income should be taxed here. That it's not all just because from your foreign activities. Some of it's related to stuff happening in the US. So the big revenue changes for under HR 1 were there were certain deductions that were made less favorable. But at the same time, there's a tax credit for taxes paid to another country that was increased. So at the federal level, there was like an up and a down balancing. The way that things flow through is the deduction that was no longer as generous would flow through to Vermont. The tax credit for taxes paid to another country, though, is not something that Vermont has, and it's not something that applies to Vermont. So this HR 1 change would have increased for this type of income how much revenue comes to Vermont. Like this would not have been a revenue loser. But when Ways and Means looked at it, they said, okay, well, we're looking at this, and I don't want to speak for them for the policy side of it, but instead of responding directly to HR 1, what this does is it just says, we're not going to allow any of the deductions that exist at the federal level for this income because Vermont already uses sales factor So corporations only pay taxes to Vermont based on sales into Vermont. And these deductions exist at the federal level because the feds are recognizing, hey, some of this we think is US income, some of it we think this is it's legitimately foreign. And that's why those deductions exist, to say some of this is legitimately foreign activity and not related. The logic is Vermont is apportioning it based on sales into Vermont. So we have a mechanism for weeding out what should go to Vermont for apportionment. There's no such thing as federal apportionment. That's why the deductions, or part of why there's a deduction and why there's a tax credit for tax paid in the country.
So we're decoupling from that.
We're just, so this language decouples from those deductions.
Yeah.
And says that we're gonna let our apportionment, sales factor apportionment, figure that out. And as a reminder to all of you, when thinking about corporate income tax, I think you probably get it, but I'll say it anyway. We have the single sales factor. Vermont does not tax corporations based on corporations being located in Vermont. That has nothing to do with it. It's all about sales into Vermont. So it can be easy to start thinking about it like we think about other things in taxes, but it's really quite different. Okay. So that's the section 250 changes. The other big change, or big decoupling, I should say, is only for personal income tax, and it has to do with something called qualified small business stock. So we're on section 55. We're on the qualified small business stock decoupling provision.
Okay, now,
And which one is it? Because there are a whole bunch of
I
things
know.
listed and they all look kind of the same.
I know.
So it's just referencing federal.
And a lot of the language you see is just dealing with different situations, like some of the stuff I was walking through with like companies going back and forth in their size.
Yeah.
And things like that. Qualified small business stock is should be section 20.
yeah, this is issue
Subdivision
55.
28. So it's not 18. Taxable income under 21 is where it would be included. And it's on line 7, page 42. In section 12 of the federal law. So this is how federal treatment of qualified small business stock works. If a corporation qualifies as a qualified small business, which after HR1 means it has assets of 75 million or less, it's able to, there's requirements and things, but they're able to issue stock, and for that to be qualified small business stock. And so if an individual, so we're talking about individual income tax as far as this goes, buys the stock, and under federal law, they hold it for at least 5 years. They don't have to pay tax on any of the gain on it up to, after HR1, up to 15 million in gains. And that's for each issuer. So you could invest in multiple of these, and the 15 million would be for each one individually. So if you have a lot of money to invest, you're investing in these qualified small businesses, that could be a lot of tax that you don't owe at all. It's excluded from your income. So the change in HR1 was to expand how much can be excluded from your income per issuer. Expanded the size of the corporation. It used to be before HR1, it was 50 million in assets. Is the size for a qualified small business, and that's increased to 75 million. And then there were also changes to how long it had to be held before you could exclude the gains for the sale of stock. It used to be after 5 years, you could exclude 100% of it. The change under HR 1. So you can exclude 50% of your gains if you held it for 3 years, 75% if you held it for 4 years, 100% if you held it for 5. So with all of those changes, what Ways and Means did was to say, we're not going to allow these gains to be excluded in Vermont. And that's what this language does.
So we tax it 100%.
Vermont will start to tax it, except that Vermont does have a partial exclusion for capital gains. So we have the 40% exclusion, which could be used. And I think that is capped at 350,000 in gains. So Vermont has that could be used to these on these gains. And Ways and Means was clear about that because in working this out with the department, at one point there was some language in here to not allow the Vermont exclusion, and Ways and Means said, no, we do want to allow that what exists in Vermont's exclusion. It's just not to allow the federal.
Like deal with the person who sells their business or their big rental card or.
Martine's not here and Mickey Mantle was mentioned.
But it's treating all capital gains the same. Essentially, this kind of qualified capital gains.
It would be treated.
Cutting Mickey.
It would be treated like any capital gain. And my understanding of the qualified small business stock is that it comes up with, startup companies, and sometimes they're receiving, they'll trade stock for some of the property that they need to set up, or they're getting payroll to get the company going.
And, all right, yeah.
So I haven't gone into a lot of the conforming stuff, but I did cover the major big decoupling changes.
Okay.
And to say that there's a lot of conforming language here to make sure that everything's spelled out well. There's at least one reference that I need to correct. Challenge anyone to try to find it before I correct it. Which there's one subdivision that's cited wrong by
You have
one.
just waved a red flag, Senator Hardy.
I'm like, I really want to find it, but I bet I won't.
Probably time better spent other ways.
Probably.
We will leave that to you to bring the Scribners.
It'd be even better if I found one that you hadn't already
That would
found.
be me or tax.
We found an E left off homelessness in health and welfare. That has been the editor's several rewrites.
So like, was that home? Yes.
There was an E left off. It was HOMLE. Not for you. This was in
Yeah.
the homeless bill, but
That's lost.
it left off the several spell checks later. Okay,
So sections 56 and 57 are part of the income tax changes. This is actually a cleanup of current law. It came up, the department pointed this out when talking about doing conforming changes for decoupling. There are some issues that with how we do apportionment when it comes to personal income taxes. So under corporate income tax, which has been something where single sales factor was redone a few years ago, and that's in pretty good shape as far as how it works. So how it works for corporate would be you take all of the income the taxpayer has everywhere, you portion it down to Vermont, and then you put tax on it. The way the letter of the law for a personal income tax apportionment, which has not been revisited in a long time, is you take all of the income and you put tax on it, and then you apportion it. This process leaves out the additions and subtractions. So in other words, the decoupling that Vermont's done from the federal tax code.
That's a pretty big one.
It can result in, so if there's a person, give you an example. It can go both ways as far as the person paying way too much tax or way too little. One example would be, Vermont's not allowed to tax federal bond income. Let's say a person had $1 million federal bond income and they didn't believe in Vermont, but they had $10,000 of rental income from a place they own in Vermont. They would have to file for Vermont, and the way that the apportionment works under the letter of the law would be, we're gonna take all that money. And at the end of the day, we're gonna say, you made $10,000 in Vermont, but you owe us $15,000 in taxes. Because we're not taking the additions and subtractions into
Yeah.
account correctly. I think the department has tried to implement this in a logical way, but when it's in the taxpayer's favor, they could say, statute says that, so what are you gonna do about it? Like,
So we need.
so it's a clarification that's needed, that's what 56 and 57 are doing, is, to spell out that the additions and subtractions that we use to decouple will apply to the personal income tax apportionment. Section 58 is change the ways and means did relating to the decoupling from the research and experimental procedures. They wanted to give something back as far as some of the revenue that was being gained in the corporate income tax changes. So section 58 increases the Vermont research and development tax credit from 27% of the federal credit to 75% of the federal credit for the expenditures that take place in Vermont. That's how that tax credit works. And that tends to be how state tax credits for R&D work.
That's a huge jump.
From what to 75?
From 27 to 75%. That's huge.
Yeah, we will look at it.
Okay.
Try to move this
What they're thinking, I think it's a-
along. This is our first walkthrough.
Almost there.
And they want us this out of here by the 17th.
Section 59, in Representative Kimball mentioned this one. 59 increases the amount of the downtown and village center tax credit that can be awarded annually by $1 million. So under current law, it's capped at $3 million a year. This would increase it to $4 million per year. And that's
Okay,
one that's been in another
It
Senate
went
bill.
through here. We took out 500,000. It went from 2 to.
I do remember you made a change when it
We
came
made
through
a
here.
change.
We made it 3.5 million.
Yeah, rather than 4.
Yes.
And then
Okay.
it was butchered.
And then it was
Yeah.
put on the wall.
It is on the wall over there in the meat shop. I just want to make sure that they get coordinated somewhere and we don't have 2 different tax credits going. I guess it's whatever gets passed last. But it should be accounted for in the budget, so
Yeah,
we'll just make sure like that and make sure
that's real money.
Yes, there is $100,000 in here, so this will go next door.
So section 60 and 61 are the annual link up. This is done every year, all right? It was,
It seems so simple compared.
I know, I know.
Which
But
does.
these are the very important parts that say that all the other stuff that you haven't decoupled from previously here, Vermont is coupling to.
Okay,
Um,
below the line, or above the line, below the line.
all the below the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then
62 and 63 is this,
it's the shuffling around of revenue deposited into funds so that transportation fund ends up getting approximately somewhere around, I'm not gonna say numbers, but JFO can talk
Yeah.
about this. A certain amount of purchase and use tax would
This-
go to the transportation fund, and a percentage more meals and rooms tax would go to the education funds to make up the difference.
there's lots of moving proposals at the moment. I think a different one is likely to arrive in the transportation bill, which will be coming here, I think, shortly. Everyone, without raising new money, is trying to find more money for transportation, or at least the Senate Transportation Committee is. The governor suggested moving purchase and use tax. We get a portion of that. The two, well, they want to take 10 million a year and finish transportation up to 50 or 60 million. This is another way to get money. This year, there will be no impact because the general fund, I think, unless they change it, it's where I spent lunchtime today, general fund will give 10 million of general fund dollars to transportation. Next year, there will be that 10 million plus, I think 10 million more if they're following the governor's proposal out of the education fund. I've been very clear that with all the change and confusion that's going on in education and the education fund, I don't think this is a year to play with it, and I believe it will result in overpaying the tax increase next year. So, but it's all coming here, and at some point we're going to have to talk about it.
There was a reference.
I actually thought Senator Beck got scissors and he was going to cut it up, but he didn't.
Cut one up.
Cut my card?
No,
No.
that's the thing.
Opening the
Cookies. Okay, Senator Chin. Goodness.
Meals and
Okay.
Rooms, that increase,
No ice cream.
that increase from 25 to 29 from Meals and Rooms going into the ed fund is currently is that taking from the general fund? Okay. So the one thing I just want to put out there that somebody smart that I respect mentioned that the other option that we could consider, and I just put it out there for JFO and others,
Looking it all up.
making sure I don't get it dropped, is that universal meals is not necessarily education. And if it were to reside in AHS over the general fund administered through them, that would be a way to lighten the property tax load, which would effectively not require this $10 million shift. I just don't know, smarter minds than I have been thinking about just moving universal meals to be housed in another fund or an organization that would oversee it, that is funded primarily through other revenues other than property
All of
taxes.
the school lunch programs are run through Agency of Education, and there are many of them. So moving the administration of it, what doesn't make sense. You can always move the funding for us without moving it to a different agency.
It's fine.
Which is what I tried to do actually in an earlier bill, Thomas, that you
Yeah.
were against.
Okay, we're not getting into that. The bottom line is, right now, without a new source of revenue, we don't have enough to do everything that needs to be done. And if we move, whatever we move out of ed into general fund is going to have to be taken out of another program, which we will probably like equally as well in the general fund. Or we're going to have to raise some taxes.
My point
Which no one likes.
is that that's what they're effectively doing with the Meals and Rooms shift
Yeah.
to the ed fund. So I just think another approach.
But if
would
ed
be
fund doesn't do it,
Another party suggested that.
we can wholeheartedly stand our ground and say, sorry, transportation fund. But we can't afford to give up $10 million, which would result day one in a property tax increase. Unless we can find another way to raise money.
Yeah, the these are the last sections of this effective date.
Okay,
Are we doing, is JFO coming up now? or are we doing
JFO
it tomorrow?
is coming up.
Okay, so I have a question.
Our early days are over. We are into crunch time. Eventually, we will get mornings. They're still trying to set that date. I don't want to let this bill go. I'm being asked to let it go because it is our one vehicle as we get to the end to put anything related.
Why are you being asked to let it go?
They're trying to just set a schedule so that we can get out of here before the 4th of July.
Don't let this one go too soon.
And that one, I've been asked.
That-
I've said it would be a real stretch.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Chris from Joint Fiscal, just to give the committee a little context, it's because decisions that live in this bill like what happens with the budget and the T-bill depend on what happens with this bill. So everything is very interconnected this year. So the other two bills cannot easily
Everything
be
is
navigated out
tied
of the Senate
together.
without having.
But
some
I mean,
guidance.
we shouldn't have to give up this bill before we get the T-bill, because the T-bill has a different construct.
You'll be
here.
you'll be getting the T-bill next week, I believe.
Okay.
We're getting the T-bill. We will look at, we've got a construct here, we've got a different construct in the T-bill. All of the constructs don't do what the Transportation Committee feels they need to do, which is a long-range plan. We can get them through this year. But if we take anything out of the ed fund or switch general fund in there, which is not guaranteed, there is money out there which we're using to buy down the property tax. And I don't, it's not in this bill, I don't think, so it must be in the education bill that's coming. That will be more controversial. This is pretty much housekeeping.
Well, when are we getting the yield bill is stuck down the hall?
No, the yield bill has been released to us. We're taking it up Tuesday.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Okay,
I think
it
that's
came
your,
in,
that's your buy down.
that may be where the buy down.
Yes.
Yeah. So the yield bill got released yesterday, and we're taking that up. But the heavy lift, from what I'm understanding, will be in the education bill. And we will just start taking testimony. We probably won't get it first because it's the education bill. But we will start working through the financing section.
In the interest of time management, if you are going to try to stick to getting this out next Friday, I have been working with Ledge Council on 2 amendments, and I don't have them finished. And I just briefly give the committee a heads up. You're aware of this, Madam Chair. I CC'd you. One of them is S-275. If you remember that creation of the cemetery vandalism response fund that we didn't have it move out during crossover, but it's stay on the wall because we had concerns about how the fees would be collected and then routed to a third party. So
Oh, the cemetery.
So I'm gonna propose, just for discussion, I sense, and since then, other advocates have reached out, and I sense support for this, if the committee's amenable to have that money not go to a third party, but instead collect the fee, keep it in the state, and then work at an appropriation. But I was gonna bring that forward as a possible thing to hang on this
Okay.
Christmas tree. And then I have Burlington, I'm trying to understand it, is asking me to clarify some TIF language. So if I feel comfortable with that, I would be bringing that forward.
Absolutely. If we start dealing in tip language,
I know.
Bill will not be out of here by next.
But I might have that amendment for us next week too to consider.
And I think both of those are John Gray pieces, by the way.
Yeah,
Right?
but
We'll work
there
with
would
John.
be, if they're tips, as the Burlington TIF is its own creature.
Sure.
Got established prior to there being a statewide standard. I don't know what it does.
I'm working on that.
Good, run it by the auditor's office, because there were some pretty,
What?
interesting discussions between the auditor and the finance director of the city 2 years ago. Yes,
Yeah, and so my colleague John Gray's looking at that
Yeah.
tip issue currently.
so we'll take a look at it. It's the reason I don't want to say this.
So before I pass things off to JFO, I do want to make sure that you're at least aware of some of the timeline things and the effective dates. I think the biggest things to be aware of are that the grand list check is not until July 1, 2031. That as in the movement from the April to the January. That's meant to line up with the timeline for the RADs under the education bill.
Okay, and they have fleshed out a lot of things like that, the regional appraisal district.
Yes, and you'll be
And we will
You'll be hearing
working
me talk
through
about that at some point,
Yeah.
yeah, when it's over. And you're gonna, whether you want to or not, you're gonna hear about RAPs.
Yeah.
And then the research and development tax credit change is, that is pushed out to January 1, 2027. So for tax years beginning January 1, 2027. So that's not right away. The decoupling and the link up, that's all, there's no gap between. There's no gap there, like that will be immediate, but that one tax credit change, there's a gap, so that's because that's not gonna be paid for right away.
Okay,
It's gonna be a revenue expense in the future.
okay.
Can I just ask, are we gonna have sort of a classic markup session on this bill, or if we have things we wanna bring up, should we be doing that today?
No, this is our first walkthrough.
I just want to give it.
Then we will have a markup. Hopefully on something like the section by section, not word by word, but. We will be looking at. Okay,
Can I ask a question? And this might blend into a Patrick question, but just looking at the JFO fiscal note, for the link up to the business interest deduction and the depreciation of assets and the small business R&E, they're all negative revenues for the state. And I thought that what we were trying to avoid was the negative revenues to the state by decoupling. But it
So,
looked like
yeah,
we're linking up.
those were all items that were related to changes from HR1,
Yeah,
but that Ways and Means decided not to decouple from it. So that's why they're showing this negative there.
oh,
Yeah.
okay, so I misunderstood it when you were explaining it then.
All the things I went through were decoupling.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the entire universe of all the HR1 changes. There were many changes that Vermont did effectively couple to, because we're doing the link up and we're not decoupling from.
Okay, so the biggest one that we're decoupling from is the section 250 deductions, the biggest in terms of money. Okay, because the business interest deduction, that's not nothing. What was the reasoning that we didn't
okay,
decouple?
why don't we get your fiscal off?
Um,
Can you answer that question? Okay,
Okay,
it seems inconsistent that that's one that was.
so I don't know, Patrick, do you want to
Yeah.
come together? Do you want to?
Why don't we do this, Madam Chair? How about just in the interest of space, I can sit in up here and then Pat can chime in
Okay.
and we can
But
defer to
you
each
can
other.
just pull a chair up there.
And since we're doing, and for the record, joint fiscal, I know it's a little late in the day and this is the first walkthrough of it.
We're getting used to
really-
this. It is going to be late days.
Yeah, and I figured you're gonna take more testimony on this
Oh,
bill,
yeah.
so I was hoping that we would give sort of a 10-minute rundown of the fiscal note and help the committee sort of drill down on what you want to hear more on.
Okay.
And then we can come in with more details about different sections, because I know like with the corporate link up and coupling, Pat's got a slide deck that, he can go through separately and really get into the weeds on that. We can't do that level of detail with this link up, but I'll pull this up real quick. if Charlotte can give me approval.
Oh, this stuff.
All right. All right, is that remotely visible, people? All right. So as you all have heard, this bill proposes numerous changes to these various tax laws. What we typically do with the miscellaneous tax bill is, since it's so big, we try to give you with the fiscal note, a very brief section by section summary, and then leave some breadcrumbs to point to the things that actually have fiscal significance or that have some more description. So I am not going to repeat everything in here that Kirby already went through, but let me just show you the top lines where the money impacts show up. So this table shows you everything across the entire bill, across all the elements. So anything that's a negative number means it's foregone revenue to the state. Anything that's positive is, a revenue increase. So just to give you all a little map here, section 17 is that the increase in the down payment assistance program tax credits, and I have more verbiage around this, but you'll see that the impact of that begins in FY 27 at greater than 50,000 of foregone revenue, and then will escalate in future years as additional layers of the credit come in.
Seen that.
Yep.
Graph, yep.
The 10-year tax study appropriation is a one-time appropriation of $100,000 to JFO. I can send you all around. The last time we did this study, it was in January of 2017. It is a very deep dive into our tax structure and who bears the tax responsibility in our state compared to other states. It really is a very thrilling project for us to work on, and we're very excited about it. It is not at all. It is not it's not a commission or anything like that, as was mentioned. This is something that, we dug up the old studies going back to the 90s. We do this every 10 years. It's a 10-year look back. And then we see how do we compare to other states? And there's often some discussion about whatever the hot topic is in the legislature at that time. So last go around, we were coming out of the Great Recession. There's
You just done a whole decoupling.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, and there was a focus on how do we compare to some of our other states and how do our taxes hold up in the event of economic volatility. There was also some discussion around what impact will Vermont's demographics have, and that led to a whole body of research that our former colleague Joyce then put out. So as Kirby mentioned, I think the focus this go around will be taking a look at any potential areas of benefits cliffs in terms of eligibility criteria for certain programs and how they intersect with our tax code, and also look at issues around wealth. So that's the 10-year tax study. 55, 60, and 61, that line rolls up all of that, the net impact of the linking and the decoupling to various tax provisions. So you will notice that there is a small hit in FY 26 that is accommodated in the House budget. And the way that's accommodated was the budget had originally contemplated carrying forward around $74 million from 26 into 27. And a lot of that would be used to buy down property taxes. The budget just carries forward 3.96 million less because we'll have an bump in 27. So that's really simple shuffling around from year to year. That R&D tax credit expansion will have an impact of 1.74 million of foregone revenue, and that begins in FY 28. The expansion of the downtown and village center tax credit by $1 million has a predictable impact beginning in FY 27. And then this shuffling around of purchase and use and meals and rooms tax revenue has some different impacts to the three major funds. So we can go into this in some more detail, but this is how the transportation fund gets about $10 million of additional revenue. This year is the House decided to do that by increasing the amount of purchase and use tax that goes to the T fund from the current 66.7, 2/3, up to 73%. that in turn drops the amount that goes to the ed fund, 33 down to 27%. And the net impact of that is very close to neutral on the ed fund, and I have a chart at the end that shows that. And then, roughly 4% of the meals and rooms tax corresponds to roughly $10 million. So in order to offset the impact of the ed fund by losing some purchase and use to the T fund, the ed fund would get 4% more of the meals and rooms tax that the general fund would give up. I'll be very, very clear about how I explain this because I've seen this characterized inaccurately elsewhere in the building and from outside groups. But this is not a 1 year fix for FY27. This change in the revenue allocation would begin in FY27 and continue until a future legislature decides to do something different.
Okay. But is any of the meals and rooms, the purchase and use now going into the general fund?
Yeah, right now, the general fund gets 69% of the meals and rooms.
That's what,
So-
so they are taking, the general fund is taking a
Right.
permanent $10 million.
Correct. It's the 10 million, it's the percentage equivalent using whole round numbers that gets you as close to $10 million as
Yeah.
makes sense. But as you all had heard, the governor had proposed in his budget a 5-year step down of the purchase and use tax revenue that goes to the ed fund, and then we'll shift that all to the T fund. This sort of commits the construct to step 1, but doesn't take steps 2 through 5 to get to, this deals with the first 10 million. It's an open question about what to do with the others.
Till we're further down the road with the educational change bill. Yeah, are able to start figuring how much money we're likely to make with the second homes tax, which is the one big change that revenue source that's coming in. We don't know how much money, we don't know how much we're gonna need. We don't know how much we're gonna make at this point. I'm assuming that if they are setting a differential rate, which I understand they are, that this building is working on the assumption that the local listers will have their grant list updated.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of open questions around
Yeah.
what's going on in the ed fund, and I wouldn't speak for any committees or legislators, but I think this question is why there was some hesitation in the other body around committing to something that would add $50+ million of pressure over 5 years to education property taxes.
Right.
So the net impacts across all the major funds are at the very, very bottom there. You can see that the ed fund is pretty close to neutral as a result of all of this. The T funds, in the neighborhood of about $10 million ahead. And, when you look across FY26 and 27, the general fund is slightly behind, but these are pretty small numbers. And I just want to remind the committee that the way the House built its budget was, there was the budget and then there's the miscellaneous tax bill. So the miscellaneous tax bill is almost self-contained in its own box. And the revenue changes in here from the coupling and the decoupling pay for some of the other things in here, including the downtown tax credit and that appropriation. So that's my way of saying, we're on it. You're not going to double dip. We'll make sure that what goes on across the hall and what goes on in this room complement each other and harmonize each other, and you're not overspending in one way.
Because a few years ago, Ways and Means sent out several bills with a tax increase attached to pay for programs in the bills, and they didn't go through the appropriations committee in the House. And so they weren't weighed against all, and when I see money being brought in and then being spent in this bill, I just want to make sure that the spent gets put on the wall and evaluated like
Okay, this is all over our spreadsheets. There's probably half a dozen bills that are floating out that have some small appropriations in them, and they're all sort of captured in the budget construct and in the big picture.
Chris, just to put a nail in this one, so the purchase and use increase and the meals and room,
Mhm.
that construct there is permanent. Both of those.
Until the future legislature decides to do something else, but it doesn't have a sunset. It's not. I'm gonna skip down to the end there, talk about that, and I can go back, but
They haven't been changed since 2000.
No, it's making sure both of them are.
yeah, so it's not just for FY 27. It's a change of, and it doesn't change the rates, it doesn't change anything like that. It's just a matter of which major fund does the revenue go into. So at the very, very end here, I'll go back, but I skipped ahead and this describes what's going on. And tries to give you a chart that's a little bit more detailed, but, you know, by shifting the roughly 7% or so, 6 to 7% of the purchase and use tax revenue equals about $10 million. So, we were asked to model this out using whole round percentages that made sense and get you as close to 10 million as possible. 9.9 million is pretty close to 10. And, we're asked to do the same thing with the meals and rooms, and a 4% shift in the revenue is about as close to $10 million as we can get. So you can see how everything nets out, you know, in the context of a $2.5 billion ed fund, that's essentially neutral. So yeah, on an ongoing basis, the transportation fund's gain is the general fund's loss.
That's non-de minimis.
It is non-de minimis. Not quite de maximis, but it's somewhere between.
And just history, when we did Act 60, we raised the gas tax as part of the financing.
And some of that went to the ed fund.
And yes, it went to the
Yeah.
fund.
So,
Yes.
so when people want to ask, why does any purchase and use tax go to the ed fund? I mean, there is a history.
And at some point, it was getting administratively difficult to divide up the gas tax. And the purchase and use, or that percentage of the purchase and use, was about the same revenue. And so the purchase and use came here, the gas tax went, but we did not steal it. It was an
No.
even swap.
You're absolutely right. And I think this happened in like 2003 or so to take effect in about 2005. And when this was done, it was to be revenue neutral, where the T fund kept all of that gas tax, and then the ed fund got a piece of the purchase and use. What has happened in the 20-ish years since then is that happened right around the time when gas consumption was peaking,
Yes.
and gasoline consumption has been declining ever since. And purchase and use tax have grown. So there's been a little bit of a alligator situation
Yes.
going on.
Cost of cars has gone up. Well, right now, we should be doing really well.
Ask
on
with the gas
gas
tax,
tax.
ask us in a couple months.
It's not a percentage.
Well,
It is
a piece of it is calculated as a percentage, but it's based on a lag on the average quarterly retail price in the prior quarter. So I think when I look
Doing
at
so well now.
we're not gonna know for a while because gas was really cheap in January and
Yeah.
February, and then it spiked at the end of the quarter.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing like any positive impact from that now in the current quarter. Talk to us in the summer when we'll see how long.
Tourists, yeah.
Yeah, so I scroll back up. I'm not going through this line by line, but I just wanted to give you a sense of this sort of complements Kirby's section by section and gives you some breadcrumbs to figure out what you should really pay attention
I
to.
like the de minimis.
And I also pointed out areas where, you know, to see description, there is a description that follows. So I will go down to the end here,
Start.
make you all dizzy in the process. So I think Kirby did an excellent job talking about in section 1, the vengeance provision, and section 2, the loophole on the PTT and the CLA. The sunset on the health IT fund, my colleague Nolan wrote an issue brief on this that is on the JFO website that we can send around that explained this in great detail. But every few years, you all have been bumping out the sunset on the health IT fund and the 0.199% claims tax that funds the health IT fund. I think you did this like a year or two ago, and the governor had proposed doing another short-term extension. This bill does a 5-year extension. So it knocked it out, and that keeps about $6 million a year of revenue going into that fund, which helps support IT systems in the healthcare sector. And there is a link here at the bottom to Nolan's issue brief. So if
Okay.
anybody has any interest, that's some excellent additional background.
You can't sleep tonight.
Tell me about it, Senator. Section 17 is that down payment assistance tax credit.
Yeah,
You all have authorized blocks of these tax credits in the past.
we've been through this.
Yeah.
It was in the housing economic development bill.
Yeah,
Right.
they got taken out of the law. And then, and
Well, they're
Laura,
all on the wall.
Laura came in and talked to us about this earlier.
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, and we
Here's
put,
the chart.
the chart is excellent. It's so good that like I couldn't make a better one. So it's like, let's just put a credit on them. Credit is due, but this will show you how the layers of the tax credit work over time and how the cost impact phases in and phases out over time. So the blue, that's current law. That's the tranches of credits that are phasing out at the $250,000 a year level, and the green would be the proposed. So you see that beginning in FY 27, there would be an additional 350,000 of foregone revenue, that goes up as things phase in and then goes down as things phase out. But you see that there's a bit of a tail on current law that will come out by FY 30.
Yeah.
So this is not a huge net change, but it is sort of a continued extension of what had been longstanding practice at a slightly higher level every year.
And coming up with a down payment when you're paying rent is one of the most difficult things.
Yeah.
First time home buyers to do.
Yeah, and again, tell me about it, Senator.
Yeah.
And the way this works is it's a tax credit that VHFA sells, and then they use the proceeds of that to pay for.
Like we do for housing development and downtown, and it is foregone revenue. It's not money that the state is putting out.
Did you all have any other questions about the Fish and Wildlife? What's going on with that? I did want to just point out that there was a $50,000 assumption in their FY 27 budget from these what they were proposing for the new access fees. This bill obviously says those access fees are not going to take effect this year. So the House budget does backfill $50,000 for the general fund.
Just wondering how they're going to enforce that. I mean, I'm just,
Enforce what?
there's so access fees, unless you go through a gated position, there's so many accesses to Hubbard Park, including through about 100 backyards.
This would be like the Fish and Wildlife access, like the sites that they
Oh,
own.
you use the boat
Yes,
launch?
Right, so as my understanding of the proposal is, it would require either a hunting or a fishing license or an access fee to be paid if you don't have one of those. So,
Because they kept talking about hiking. How do you,
there is conceivably places to hike on Fish and Wildlife lands.
yes, there is, but I'm wondering where the checkpoint is that they charge you the fee. Okay, can you?
I think we've talked about that, and you can look at the language in the bill for more specifics. The federal link up in decoupling, Pat can really give you a detailed walkthrough at a future date. But what I really wanted to point out is we put a chart in here that just looks at the impacts of all of the tax policy provisions in a handful of those sections. So these feed up into that summary chart at the very, very beginning on the front page. But this goes sort of provision by provision to show you what the estimated impacts are. So, section 17, that's the state down payment credit. So that's sort of separate, but 55, 60, and 61, that all has to deal with the link up and the decoupling of the various provisions. So you can see which ones move the needles in which directions and by how much. you could see the increase in Vermont's R&D tax credit would take effect in 28. And I see Pat has something
Pat has-
Yeah,
insightful.
just
to offer.
before we moved on from this, I wanted to answer a couple of specific questions I heard in some of the previous conversation. So Senator Hardy, you had asked about why some of those provisions in there that have a negative revenue impact. The House had decided that they were going to actively come into that. I'm sure you'll have tax in at some point, but they did go to that committee and expressly say that some of those provisions in there that are being linked onto would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for them to administer if we were to decouple from them. So there was a real administrative challenge, specifically on one that you were going to hear, the business interest deduction.
Okay.
And that's sort of, it's a two-way street. The administration or the tax department also came in and said, please decouple from that bonus depreciation because we want to be consistent with how we administer this type of deduction. With the other bonus depreciations that are out there.
Okay.
And so the second thing, I did hear some gasps when the percent of the research and development tax credit was mentioned.
Yeah, it just went up a lot.
So 27 to 75%. So the last tax expenditure report we had estimated total, it's about a $7 million in its existing state. But there's some important things to know about how it's calculated that maybe we'll explain why that number in the table looks a lot smaller than you would expect.
Yeah, it's true.
So it's calculated based on 20% of those expenses that you incur in a given year over the base amount, and the base amount is the average from the previous 4 years. So it's the increment. So basically, to keep claiming it, you keep having to increase your R&D spending every year to consistently claim it.
Do you have a list of who's gotten this credit? Is
We
that,
absolutely do, and it's one of the only places I've ever seen this in statute where it's in statute that the tax department has to publish a list of every company that's claimed
okay,
that credit.
can you send that?
I'd be happy to send that to you,
Yeah,
yes.
that's interesting. Okay, thank you.
And another just key piece that if there's not the existing tax liability to claim the credit against, like your credit bigger than your liability, there's a 10-year carry forward.
Okay, so it's
So I guess
it's not a refundable tax credit. You
No.
have to have liability,
yes.
but you can share. Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay,
And I also just wanted to point out that the link up to the child independent care tax credit expansion, that is one of the few individual provisions of HR 1 that actually does flow through Vermont. So, because that we are tied to the federal
Yeah.
credit. So, right?
Yes, and I also just want to reiterate something Kirby mentioned. A lot of these business related taxes do ultimately end up on personal income tax schedule. Because it depends on how the business is incorporated, whether it's C corp
That's
or
right.
pass through. Yeah.
And I also just wanted to mention, I think you all know this, but not everybody watching this always knows this, and things can get a little convoluted when we talk about things. So when we talk about linking up and decoupling, what flows through and what doesn't, like if we're decoupled from a federal provision like this, it doesn't mean that the taxpayer doesn't benefit from the federal provision. It just means that Vermont isn't adding on to that
it
benefit.
doesn't get, it still gets the federal benefit, it just doesn't get it on.
I mean, we can't override federal tax law? Is that what you're saying?
No,
I'm not a
it would get X% of your federal tax liability.
Well, I think, yes, but a whole lot of states
Oh.
who are tightly coupled are now scrambling to figure out,
We,
prior legislatures exercised a great deal of wisdom by tying to AGI.
I believe that was Stephanie's idea.
There are,
Started with the state tax.
yeah, 'cause there are states that are coupled to, federal taxable income, and they're scrambling because some of this, the deductions on overtime
Yeah.
and tipped income and some of those other things are flowing through to them, and they're not flowing through to us, because that happens after AGI.
Yeah.
So, that is like the meat of the fiscal note, and you guys are probably really
I
sick of
think
hearing
we've
from us. by now.
absorbed most of what we can absorb today.
And we're happy to come back.
Yeah, we will have you back. I may have to start clearing decks next week.
I already sent them an invitation for fall Thursday afternoon.
Okay, but they want this out of here on Friday, so we may have to move some other things down. This is a big one, so we'll talk in the morning.
Do you think that, you need us to come back like with any educational presentations, or is it more come back and just see what the committee wants as far as changes? Like,
Well,
what do you?
Patrick has slides.
Yeah,
I know the senior
I think we need
has
to go to the
slides.
slides, that would be helpful.
We've heard they're really good.
Yeah. But then we can propose some changes or modifications.
Yeah, I have.
I mean, I think first we need to understand what they did before we decide what we want to change.
With the decoupling, this is just a decoupling, right?
I have slides that focus on the link up link, so it would cover both things that we're linking up to the flow through and what would be coupling from. And I can also include materials on the R&D tax credit, for example, which is the state level.
We could also give more background on the way the system works and stuff like that too. So that's kind of what my question is. What are you looking for?
I'm looking at time.
Well, we have some of those materials already from your joint session.
Yeah.
First week. So.
And that might just a reminder of,
Yeah.
if we didn't decouple, what would happen, because when we did it like the first week, we thought we were looking at decimal stuff, and then as it started to flesh out, it got to be more like topsoil that we were gonna lose. I mean, it was a much more significant number.
And I'm happy to walk the committee through how that process of updating.
Went and this is the solution as to decoupling. And
I'd also mention, Madam Chair, while we're still on the record, that the tax department was hugely helpful to JFO and working through all of these estimates. These are consensus estimates, and they've just been great partners.
and we will have them, and a good part of this is their really housekeeping section. They did walk me through it, and before we even had the bill, and we'll have them, I guess, Rebecca, be over and see if we can get her to walk us through their sections very briefly, because most of them aren't too controversial. Not quite as bad as the 88 page, 10 of which is changing a capital I to a small I.
Oh, that was
About
fun, Madam Chair,
about his housekeeping. Be careful, I need a reporter for that.
Yeah, either me